North Korea is a country unlike any other in the world today, in terms of its isolation, surveillance, and control over its citizens. It is the only nation where leaving without the express permission of the state is considered treason, punishable by harsh sentences or even execution. The government enforces strict restrictions not only on travel outside the country, but also on movement within its own borders. Citizens must secure official permits just to travel from one province to another within the country. This policy serves to keep the population tightly controlled and to ensure that the regime can track every movement of its people. The regime's totalitarian control. The North Korean government's level of control over its citizens is extreme. It maintains the world's most repressive system, marked by relentless surveillance and a total absence of personal freedoms. All media in North Korea is state-run, and free speech is non-existent. Dissent is not tolerated, and the government enforces a brutal policy of punishment and terror against anyone perceived as a threat to the regime. In addition to the mass surveillance, any form of disobedience or perceived defection is met with severe consequences. Political prisoners and harsh punishments. The human rights record of North Korea is universally regarded as the worst in the world. Amnesty International has estimated that approximately 200,000 political prisoners are held in labor camps throughout the country, where they are subjected to grueling conditions, forced labor, torture, and even summary executions. This is only part of the picture, as North Korea also enforces collective punishment. If someone in a family is caught committing a crime, the entire family, including children, may be punished, as seen in the shocking case of a 2-year-old child being sentenced to life in prison after their parents were discovered with a Bible. The regime's zero-tolerance approach to any form of foreign influence or subversive material is also evident in the severe penalties imposed on anyone found in possession of outside content, including books, films, or even information smuggled from abroad. The punishment for these crimes can include years of forced labor, imprisonment, or even death. In 2009, an incident involving the possession of a Bible led to a child's life sentence in prison, illustrating the extreme lengths the regime goes to in order to maintain its control over its citizens. Public executions and brutal repression. North Korea is one of only 4 countries in the world that still carries out public executions, a practice designed to instill fear in the population and deter any form of dissent. Along with Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Somalia, North Korea continues to use public executions as a tool of state control, subjecting prisoners, many of whom are accused of relatively minor offenses, to gruesome and public death sentences. These executions serve as both a punishment and surveillance of foreign visitors and tourists. Foreign visitors to North Korea face an even more intense level of scrutiny. The regime strictly controls and monitors all foreigners who are granted permission to enter the country. Visitors are placed under constant surveillance, with their movements tightly restricted to state-approved areas. They are typically shown only what the government wants them to see, in a highly curated and controlled manner. This carefully orchestrated presentation is designed to project an image of a thriving, orderly society, masking the harsh realities of life for ordinary citizens. One of the most tragic examples of the regime's brutal control over foreign visitors is the case of Otto Warmbier, an American student who visited North Korea in 2016. Warmbier was arrested after allegedly attempting to steal a propaganda poster from his hotel. For this seemingly minor offense, he was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor in a North Korean prison camp. After 17 months in captivity, Warmbier was returned to the United States in a comatose state and died shortly afterward. His case highlighted the extreme risks that foreigners face when visiting North Korea, where the arbitrary and draconian laws can lead to deadly consequences. The geography of isolation. North Korea's geographical position also plays a significant role in its isolation. Bordered by the Sea of Japan to the east and the Yellow Sea to the west, the country is naturally cut off from much of the world. Escape by sea is almost impossible due to the lack of boats and the constant patrols by the North Korean Navy, especially along the southern border near South Korea. This makes attempts to flee the country via the seas incredibly risky. South Korea, the destination for defectors. Despite the extreme risks involved in attempting to leave, many North Koreans are motivated to escape the harsh conditions in their homeland by the hope of reaching South Korea. South Korea, which is wealthier and more developed, offers a much higher standard of living. Furthermore, South Korea recognizes all ethnic Koreans as its citizens, regardless of their place of origin, meaning that any North Korean who manages to reach South Korean soil automatically gains South Korean citizenship. For many North Korean defectors, this prospect of a better life in the South is worth the risk of death or imprisonment. While the journey to South Korea is fraught with dangers, including the constant threat of being caught by Chinese authorities or trafficked along the way, many defectors continue to attempt the perilous journey. They see it as the only way to escape the oppressive regime and the grim prospects that await them in North Korea. The perpetuation of isolation. The Kim dynasty has worked tirelessly for decades to maintain this isolation, ensuring that North Korea remains a de facto island, cut off from the rest of the world. This isolation is not only geographic, but also ideological. The regime has cultivated a climate of extreme nationalism and self-reliance, known as juche, that justifies its separation from the international community. The state's control over information, travel, and communication with the outside world is all part of a strategy to keep the population in the dark about the realities of life outside the country and to prevent any outside influence that could challenge the regime's authority. In this context, smuggling information into the country or helping someone escape is incredibly difficult. A nation of fear and control, North Korea remains one of the most isolated, controlled, and repressive countries in the world today. The regime's complete control over its citizens' movements, thoughts, and actions, combined with its brutal punishments for even the slightest infractions, has created a society where fear and obedience are paramount. While the rest of the world moves forward, North Korea remains locked in time, a nation where its people live under the thumb of a totalitarian regime, constantly reminded that even the smallest act of defiance can result in death or a lifetime of suffering. The regime's efforts to maintain this isolation are deeply entrenched in the country's geography, its ideology, and its policies. For the people of North Korea, the dream of escape to a better life remains a distant hope, often extinguished before it can even be realized. Escape from North Korea. The harrowing journey to freedom. North Korea remains one of the most isolated and repressive regimes in the world, where freedom of movement is strictly controlled, and the consequences for attempting to escape are severe. Despite the extreme risks, many North Korean defectors have managed to flee the country, with around 34,000 reaching South Korea since the 1990s. By contrast, only 1,000 have made it to Europe, and about 200 to the United States. The most direct route to escape, across the heavily fortified demilitarized zone, DMZ, that separates North and South Korea, has always been nearly impossible due to its extreme security. The DMZ, a barrier of death. The DMZ is one of the most heavily militarized borders in the world, extending across the entire length of the Korean peninsula. Contrary to its name, the DMZ is not a neutral zone, but a heavily fortified and dangerous no-man's land. Both North and South Korea maintain tens of thousands of soldiers on either side of the border, with walls, barbed wire, and numerous landmines adding to the deadly obstacles. Crossing the DMZ is an incredibly risky endeavor, as soldiers on both sides are under orders to shoot anyone attempting to cross. With over 750,000 North Korean soldiers deployed within 100 kilometers of the border, and 450,000 South Korean and 20,000 US soldiers on the southern side, this route is virtually impassable for defectors. The northern border, a more feasible path. For many North Korean defectors, the northern border with China and Russia has historically been a more viable escape route. While heavily guarded, this border is much longer, spanning over 1,300 kilometers, and consists of rugged, sparsely populated areas, making it easier for defectors to cross. During the winter months, when the Yalu and Tumen rivers freeze, and during summer when the water levels are low, the rivers form natural crossing points for defectors and smugglers alike. The risks in China and Russia. While escaping into China or Russia is possible, it comes with significant risks. Once defectors cross into these countries, they are not out of danger. Both China and Russia have agreements with North Korea to repatriate defectors, often returning them to face severe punishment. The goal for many defectors is not to stay in China or Russia, but to use them as transit points to reach safer countries where they might find refuge. However, countries like Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam have historically been the destinations of choice. While these countries are not perfect, they have typically allowed North Korean defectors to reach South Korea, which automatically recognizes all North Koreans as its citizens. Thus, defectors can eventually be deported to South Korea, where they are given asylum and a new life. The path to safety. The journey to South Korea is perilous and can take months or even years. After crossing into China, defectors typically move gradually toward Mongolia, Thailand, or Vietnam, where they can seek help from local authorities. In many cases, defectors surrender to the authorities in these countries and, in line with South Korea's policy, they are deported to South Korea. Despite the challenges, this route has provided a lifeline for many North Koreans desperate to escape the repressive regime. The 1990s famine, a catalyst for defections. The surge in defections in the 1990s was largely triggered by a devastating famine that swept through North Korea following the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. The Soviet Union had been North Korea's primary financial and economic backer, and its collapse left North Korea vulnerable. The North Korean economy, already struggling under the weight of heavy sanctions and limited agricultural output, was unable to cope with the loss of Soviet support. The country's agricultural sector was severely limited, with only 20% of its land considered arable. Additionally, the country suffered from flooding and droughts, which exacerbated the crisis. Without access to the necessary farming tools and fertilizer, North Korea's agricultural production plummeted, leading to widespread food shortages. The famine caused immense suffering, and while exact numbers are difficult to determine due to the secretive nature of the regime, estimates of the death toll range from 300,000 to as many as 3.5 million people. This famine pushed many North Koreans to the brink, leading to an increase in defections as citizens sought to escape the dire conditions. A dangerous escape. The journey to freedom for North Korean defectors is fraught with peril. While many have found their way to South Korea, the road to escape is dangerous and often deadly. The heavily fortified borders, the threat of deportation back to North Korea, and the uncertainty of life in a foreign country all contribute to the difficulty of escaping the regime. However, the hope of a better life in South Korea remains a powerful motivator for those willing to risk everything for freedom. The dramatic increase in defections following the 1990s, famine illustrates the desperation of the North Korean people and the lengths to which they will go to escape the horrors of life. The decline of North Korean defections, a combination of crackdowns and economic barriers. Between 1994 and 1998, North Korea experienced a massive spike in defections, driven largely by the Great Famine, which left millions of people desperate to escape the country. Alongside this crisis, a class of entrepreneurial smugglers emerged, who capitalized on the country's suffering by smuggling both much-needed items like food and medicine, as well as illicit contraband such as Western and South Korean movies, TV shows, and books. This created a network of escape routes for defectors, most of whom initially crossed the northern border into China, and then made their way to neighboring Mongolia, Vietnam, or Thailand. From there, they could be deported to South Korea, where they would be granted asylum and citizenship. By the early 2000s, thousands of North Koreans were successfully defecting each year, with a peak of 2,914 defectors in 2009, the largest number in a single year since the Korean War. The trend continued into the 2000s, with over 2,000 defectors escaping each year, but things began to change drastically by the end of 2011. The shift under Kim Jong-un's leadership. In December 2011, Kim Jong-un succeeded his father, Kim Jong-il, as the supreme leader of North Korea. One of his immediate priorities was to crack down on defections and smuggling. Under his rule, the government implemented a series of measures to prevent people from leaving and to close down escape routes. 1. Border security increased. Signal jammers were installed along the northern frontier to block foreign cell and satellite signals, which had previously allowed defectors to communicate with outside organizations. 2. Heightened surveillance. Intelligence gathering on phone calls in the northern regions of the country increased, while additional border fences were constructed, and patrols became more frequent. This made it much harder for people to cross the border into China or Russia. 3. Deportation agreements. In 2014, Russia signed an agreement with North Korea, committing to deporting any North Korean defectors found within its borders back to North Korea, effectively eliminating Russia as an escape route. China, too, began tightening its grip on defectors by improving its surveillance state and increasing enforcement of its deportation policies. The rise of the surveillance state in China. After 2016, with the passing of China's cybersecurity law, China's surveillance capabilities expanded dramatically. By 2020, there were more than 620 million surveillance cameras in China, more than 12 times the number in the United States. Additionally, China began rigorously monitoring internet and cellular services, making it even more difficult for defectors to move undetected. As China continues to treat all North Korean defectors as illegal immigrants, the increased surveillance meant defectors faced a much greater risk of being caught while trying to cross through China on their way to Thailand, Vietnam, or Mongolia. This raised the stakes considerably, forcing brokers, who had previously helped North Koreans cross these dangerous routes, to charge higher fees. The soaring costs of escape. As the risks of defection increased, so did the prices charged by brokers and human traffickers. In 2007, a broker would charge approximately $2,000 to help a North Korean defector reach Thailand or Vietnam, which was a steep price for most defectors, but still attainable. However, by 2012, shortly after Kim Jong-un assumed power, this price had doubled to $4,000, and by 2015, it reached as high as $8,000. By 2017, fees ranged from $13,000 to $16,000 per person. For many North Koreans, the shift to self-help defection. By the mid-2010s, most defectors could no longer rely on external help and had to navigate the treacherous journey across the border into China and beyond on their own. This journey required them to travel alone across rugged mountainous terrain and through vast expanses of China, all while evading the ever-growing surveillance and police checkpoints. The language barrier in China made it even more difficult for defectors to seek help from locals, and many were at a high risk of being captured and sent back to North Korea. The dangers were compounded by the fact that China and Russia had increasingly effective mechanisms for tracking and deporting defectors. As a result, the number of successful defections began to decline. The downward trend of defections. By 2019, only 1,047 North Koreans managed to escape to South Korea, a significant drop from the peak years of the early 2000s. As of 2020, the number of defectors continued to dwindle, with experts predicting that escape from North Korea was becoming more difficult than ever before. The crackdown by the Kim Jong-un regime, combined with the tightening security in China and Russia, has made it increasingly unlikely for North Koreans to flee their country in the years ahead. In summary, the dramatic spike in defections in the late 1990s and early 2000s was fueled by a combination of desperation due to the famine and the emergence of a smuggling network. However, as Kim Jong-un came to power and initiated a series of crackdowns, the ability to escape North Korea became increasingly restricted. This, combined with the growing surveillance apparatus in neighboring countries, has made it far more difficult and costly for North Koreans to defect, leading to a steady decline in the number of successful escapes. North Korea's increasing isolation, the impact of COVID-19, and the regime's control measures. In January 2020, just 2 months after the first reported case of COVID-19 in China, North Korea became the first country in the world to completely seal its borders. The regime justified this drastic step as a way to protect the country from the virus, a decision rooted in the country's vulnerability due to its dire malnutrition levels, estimated at around 42% of the population. Malnourished individuals are far more susceptible to diseases like COVID-19, making the government's early actions understandable in one sense. North Korea's first confirmed COVID-19 case was only reported on May 12, 2022, and just 3 months later, the government declared victory over the virus. Officially, North Korea reported only 74 COVID-related deaths, a figure widely regarded as being significantly underreported. Some anonymous sources suggested that the true toll was much higher, potentially around 45,000 deaths across the country, based on extrapolations from Pyongyang's case rates. However, this figure remains speculative, and should be taken with caution, given the lack of transparency from the regime. Beyond the public health crisis, the North Korean government appeared to capitalize on the pandemic as an opportunity to tighten its already strict control over the country, closing itself off even further from the outside world. In August 2020, North Korea established buffer zones along its northern borders with China and Russia, issuing orders for soldiers to shoot on sight anyone attempting to cross these borders without permission. These shoot-to-kill orders have been in effect ever since and are part of a broader strategy of militarizing the borders. Satellite imagery has shown that significant fortifications were constructed along these borders during the pandemic. Hundreds of kilometers of new walls, fences, barbed wire, and guard posts have been installed, effectively sealing off the once porous northern border and making it nearly impossible for anyone, be it defectors, smugglers, or foreign visitors, to cross. However, the tightening of the northern borders is not the only measure the regime has taken. In December 2020, North Korea passed a new law known as the Reactionary Ideology and Culture Rejection Act, which criminalized the possession of foreign materials, such as films, books, and music, that were not approved by the government. Violators of the law could face severe punishments, including public execution for smuggling or distributing such materials. Even possessing or watching foreign media could result in 10 years of hard labor in prison camps. This law served to further isolate the population from the outside world, particularly from South Korean media and Western culture, which had previously been smuggled into the country via micro-SD cards and flash drives. Before the pandemic, North Koreans had been able to access a significant amount of smuggled foreign media, such as South Korean TV dramas. The decline in defections, along with the shutdown of borders and the tightening of internal controls, defections from North Korea also experienced a sharp decline during the pandemic. In 2020, only 229 North Koreans successfully defected to South Korea, a tenfold decrease from the thousands of defections recorded in the early 2000s. The numbers continue to plummet in 2021 and 2022, with only 63 and 67 defections recorded in those years, respectively. These figures represent the lowest levels of defections in North Korea's history since its establishment in 1948. Even in the first quarter of 2023, when conditions like frozen rivers made crossings easier, only 34 defections were recorded, underscoring the increasing difficulty of escaping the country. The North Korean government's efforts to prevent defections have become part of a broader goal of transforming the country into a completely closed system, both physically and digitally. One of the key components of this transformation is the strict regulation of digital technology within the country. North Korea's digital isolation. In North Korea, the internet is highly restricted. State-owned phones are the only ones allowed, and they are incapable of accessing international websites or making international calls. The North Korean intranet operates as a closed network, with content strictly monitored by the government. People in North Korea are only allowed to access content that is sanctioned by the state, further limiting their exposure to foreign ideas and information. This isolation extends beyond the physical realm to the digital realm, creating a society that is increasingly separated from the rest of the world. The pandemic has accelerated the North Korean regime's vision of a closed digital state, where both physical borders and digital networks are completely sealed off from the outside world. This effort to eliminate the flow of foreign information and restrict personal mobility represents a fundamental shift in the regime's approach to maintaining control over its population. Since 2020, North Korea has become more isolated than ever before. The pandemic provided the regime with a pretext to seal its borders, intensify its surveillance, and restrict the flow of information. New laws have further cemented the regime's control, criminalizing the possession of foreign media and reinforcing the shoot-to-kill orders at the northern border. Defections have become exceedingly rare, with the number of successful escapes plummeting to historical lows. In essence, North Korea has transformed into the most isolated country in the world, using the pandemic as a catalyst to deepen its control over both the physical and digital lives of its citizens. This has made the country one of the largest and most successful prisons in human history, with the regime effectively trapping its population within an increasingly repressive and isolated state. North Korea's isolation and control of digital communication. Since 2020, North Korea has ramped up its efforts to completely isolate itself from the outside world, focusing especially on digital communication. A central part of this isolation strategy is the use of state-sanctioned phones operating on Red Star OS, a government-controlled operating system. These phones are heavily restricted, designed to block foreign files, apps, and content that did not originate from within North Korea. State-sanctioned phones and their restrictions. The Red Star OS phones are tightly controlled by the government, with no access to international phone calls or the internet. They are equipped with features that allow the authorities to take screenshots of messages and activity, which cannot be deleted. Inspections by North Korean police are mandatory, ensuring that citizens cannot use the phones for anything that the regime does not approve of. These phones are essentially confined to North Korea, with strict limitations on what they can do. The challenge of foreign phones. Foreign-made phones, however, have posed a significant challenge to the regime. These devices can make international calls and store foreign media, such as videos, text, and music. For many North Koreans, these phones offered a rare connection to the outside world, allowing them to communicate with relatives who had defected or access foreign content. Due to their high demand, these phones were often smuggled into the country by brokers, but owning one came with great risk, as they were illegal and could result in severe punishment. COVID-19 and the tightening of control. The COVID-19 pandemic marked a pivotal moment in North Korea's digital isolation strategy. As the country sealed its borders to prevent the spread of the virus, it also tightened its grip on foreign phones and other contraband. The regime further restricted the flow of goods and people, including the smuggling of foreign phones into the country. The prices for these phones skyrocketed, with brokers charging up to $21,000 in 2021, a dramatic increase from previous years. For many North Koreans, this price was far beyond reach, especially since most earn under $2,000 per year. Trapped defectors and escalating border controls. In addition to limiting digital access, North Korea began refusing to take back defectors caught trying to escape, particularly those caught in China. The official excuse was that these defectors could bring COVID-19 back into the country. As a result, thousands of North Korean defectors remain trapped in Chinese prisons, caught in a state of limbo. Global digital isolation, a broader trend. While North Korea's actions are extreme, other countries have also moved toward greater digital control. China has blocked major American websites like Google, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Wikipedia for years. In the United States, TikTok, a Chinese app, has faced growing scrutiny. In 2023, Montana became the first US state to pass legislation banning TikTok on all personal devices, set to take effect in 2024. This reflects a larger global trend toward digital censorship and control over information flows. North Korea, the world's largest digital prison. Despite these global trends, North Korea's isolation stands out as perhaps the most complete and extreme. The regime has turned the country into what could be called the world's largest prison, where information, technology, and people are kept from the outside world. The 1,000 defectors trapped in China represent a tragic example of North Korea's complete control over its citizens. They live in a state of digital and physical isolation, unable to communicate with the outside world or escape the country's grip. The closed digital state. North Korea's approach to digital isolation goes beyond just controlling information. It is about creating a closed digital state. The regime has developed a highly controlled system where foreign influence is non-existent. The government's efforts to lock down both the physical and digital realms have led to a total separation from the global community. In this digital isolation, North Korea has become a black hole, where no information or people can escape or enter, making it a unique and extreme case of government control. A new digital reality. The digital landscape in North Korea represents a severe example of how a nation can impose complete digital control over its citizens. While other nations like China and the United States may place restrictions on internet use and digital access, North Korea has taken it to an extreme, creating a society that exists in a completely separate universe from the rest of the world. The North Korean people are trapped in a country that has become an impenetrable fortress, where escape is nearly impossible, and the flow of information has been entirely cut off.